Today we have an election prediction between Senator Sherrod Brown from the great state of Ohio. I'm pretty sure all of you know him. He's up for re-election in 2018 and used to be a target from the GOP for his re-election bid. But right now, after that, Josh Mandel dropped out of the race a while ago. I mean, the primary has already occurred for the Republican side, but that was when the GOP finally realized that that race could have been out of their reach, and pretty much is out of their reach now, considering that they're focusing a lot more of their funds on a number of other races. But when we're looking at this electoral map, we have a Democratic candidate who comes from the Rust Belt, the same area that Hillary Clinton failed to carry for the first time for the Democratic Party in 28 years. So keep that in mind. Having a Democrat come from the Rust Belt, which is an area that is always vital to a Republican victory. Keep in mind, Republicans typically go through the Rust Belt in order to win presidential elections, whether it be Ohio or Iowa. When it came down to Donald Trump, it took Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and a couple of other Rust Belt states. Again, Ohio, Indiana, Iowa, which all landed in this column, with the actual great possibility of Minnesota possibly flipping in 2016, but it didn't flip. Actually, speaking in 2016, there's a video coming out today that shows all the media predictions and my own prediction from 2016, which I've already done before, but that video should come out pretty soon, and if you want to go ahead and watch that, just check on my page. But back to today's topic. Since we're going through an election prediction, starting off with someone from a hotly contested swing state, we're not going to fill in home states first. We're going to go ahead and start off with all the races that obviously are going to be called at poll closing time for the respective parties. All these safe states are not going to flip to the GOP or the Democratic Party, depending on which state we're talking about, anytime soon. We go over to Nebraska. Typically, I fill in that second district as a toss-up race, which is why I'm doing it now. You should expect that to be routine in a number of my videos, unless it's someone like Nancy Pelosi against Donald Trump for obvious reasons. But when we're looking at this, Sherrod Brown could actually be a very strong candidate. I've actually considered putting him up against Joe Donnelly in a 2020 Democratic primary, because both of them I do see as very good contenders for the 2020 presidential election. Yes, they may not come off as the most, they're not nationally known, first of all, so they need the name recognition. They do come from swing states, not so much Indiana, more Ohio, but still, both of the candidates I do think could do pretty well against Donald Trump, just based off their values, the places where they stand on a number of social issues, a number of economic issues that could definitely help them in areas such as the Rust Belt, considering that both of them do come from, I guess, the Rust Belt itself. And Indiana not really being a swing state, but Ohio definitely, which is really why I think that Sherrod Brown would do well in the Rust Belt, considering that he comes from a state like Ohio. Again, we're filling in this map. We have 182 electoral votes for Sherrod Brown and 163 for Donald Trump. So obviously some of these states are still going to remain in the either Democratic or Republican party's column. States like Georgia and Arizona probably aren't flipping for someone like Sherrod Brown, considering that he's number one, not going to get the Latino vote out too well. He could do well with firm opposition to the president from both of those minority groups, but he's probably not going to be doing this to a point where it would overcome the Republican majority in states like Georgia or Arizona enough to flip it into the Democratic column. But it does seem pretty realistic to possibly see that in a future election, not 2020, but possibly 2024, depending on whenever a number of minority voters come out in full force, which would definitely be something that's not beneficial to the Republican Party at all. And when we're looking at this map, again, there are those states that stay in the Democratic column. Virginia, especially with a candidate coming from the Rust Belt, that includes Minnesota. So that puts Sherrod Brown at 205 electoral votes and Donald Trump at 190 electoral votes. Again, another state that's probably not flipping to the GOP, New Mexico. That state was pretty reliably Democratic in a Republican wave year per se when it came down to the presidential election. So if this was a year that Hillary Clinton had won, you could have expected her to win in there by double digits, but she still did win there, I believe, by 8 or 9%, but that's still a pretty considerable margin, considering that the surrounding states or other swing states were not as kind to the Clinton campaign. But Colorado will still remain in the Democratic column. Hillary Clinton only carried that by around 3%, but keep in mind this is traditionally a Democratic state, and you can't really expect it to go to another type of political party, especially when a year where we have a very not highly approved president, especially in states like Colorado and New Mexico, which didn't even vote for him the first time. You can't expect someone who's better than Hillary Clinton, the first runner, obviously, to lose in states that she was able to win in. That put Sherrod Brown at 219 electoral votes, but to be completely honest with you, Donald Trump would likely carry the state of Florida. We don't see someone who comes from the Rust Belt being able to appeal to a state like Florida, especially if they're not known nationwide, number one. They would have to get their name out, and Florida is typically a conservative state when it comes down to Senate elections, governor elections, state and local elections. Just in presidential elections, of course, it gets close because everyone comes out and votes. But when it comes down to this election, I don't see Sherrod Brown winning over a number of Puerto Rican new. I mean, he will win them over. Obviously, Democrats do a lot better with Latino voters than Republicans do. But I don't think it's enough to push Sherrod Brown over the top in a state like Florida. And the same thing goes for North Carolina, just with the African-American population. North Carolina is typically a conservative state. We really don't see a great possibility of Democrats winning here. Again, I pretty much am annoyed all the time when I see states like North Carolina as a toss-up state, because it hasn't really been a toss-up state. It's just been a leaning Republican state that once voted for a Democrat, Barack Obama, since 1992, and probably before then. That's when I cut off the modern political era, and I say this is our, again, modern political era. And North Carolina only went to Obama by 14,000 votes. Sherrod Brown is not the one. We go over to Nevada. I do see a narrow victory for Sherrod Brown here. I don't see it for many Rust Belt Democrats, only because I think he would be able to just garner a couple more voters coming from a swing state, being able to appeal to a number of voters. And also Nevada, the approval rating of the president is pretty good for a state that Hillary Clinton had won. But again, there's still that firm opposition to the president regardless of where he goes. And I think that they would narrowly come out and vote for Sherrod Brown. And also we have a little bit more new polling data coming from the Rust Belt, which is where I'm headed next. We go over to Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania. If you actually want to go check out the new opinion polling data there, it actually shows double-digit leads for Democratic candidates in the governor races here and also the Senate races here, which is very interesting to say the least, considering that Wisconsin has a governor who's going for a third term statewide. So that is Scott Walker, I believe. Am I wrong about that? No, because I always confuse him and Rick Scott. Cool, we're moving on. But Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania have definitely drawn a lot more to the Democratic side, whether it be special elections in Michigan and Pennsylvania or a Wisconsin State Supreme Court, not national, obviously, election in Wisconsin that leaned towards the liberal side. A lot of the indications that we're seeing here are approval ratings, consistent polls that show Democrats ahead in the number of these races. We're all seeing a huge draw towards the Democrats. And keep in mind, Sherrod Brown is from the Rust Belt, so that would definitely be something that helps him as well. Being able to appeal to the white working class in a Senate election is a lot harder than doing it in a presidential election, because the Republican Party always has a disadvantage of that. When it comes down to Senate elections, a lot more issues are thrown on the table because it's not as inflicting on the national composition per se. We look at this map. Sherrod Brown has now been elected president at 271 electoral votes. We go up to, I said that weird. We go up to Maine. The second district goes to Trump, obviously. Typically a Republican district now. The first district, typically a Democratic district. We go to Maine at large. I see it narrowly going to Sherrod Brown, along with New Hampshire, retaining its Democratic identity. And keep in mind that the Rust Belt is going. New Hampshire is probably going as well. We go over to Ohio. I do see a narrow victory for Sherrod Brown in his home state, only because it is his home state, and I think he would definitely be able to, number one, he has a grassroots campaign here, be able to get on a number of voters that typically don't vote, only because it is his home state, and it would be something that's definitely beneficial to the Brown campaign. But Iowa and Nebraska's second district, I see narrowly landing in the Trump column yet again after 4 years. So our final electoral map finishes off with 296 electoral votes for Sherrod Brown and 242 for Donald Trump. Thank you guys for watching this video. Comment down suggestions below, and I will see you all tomorrow.